If you've clicked on this video, you're obviously super excited to know more about the developers of the universally praised and forever loved Cyberpunk 2077. Jokes aside, this video will be my first in a new series where each episode I'll take a look at certain developers or publishers that seem to have a lot on their plate and condense it all down into one place. So we'll take recent, relevant news articles as well as any game announcements and even possibly find information about the size of the teams and any partnerships that do occur. So if all that makes sense, then strap in as we take a look at the state of CD Projekt Red. Yes, I know it's technically just CD Projekt for the entire publisher, but for the sake of things I will be saying CDPR for this video because it's mostly muscle memory. Now it's no secret that CDPR has been the target of a lot of scrutiny over the past couple of years. Mostly from the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, which was so bad that it gave a lot of players extra chromosomes. Now fast forward to April of 2022, and as of the company's most recent financial call, we have a lot of new statistics to look at. So I think the best way to approach this financial call for now is to approach it on a per-game basis. So let's start with The Witcher, my personal favorite of the two franchises. There's a couple of big pieces of news that we need to talk about outside of the earnings call before we even get into that. And one of those bits of news is actually the announcement of the next installment, given the subtext "A New Saga Begins" in the Witcher franchise. Now the announcement for this came back in March with a blog post, but it told us quite a bit without even really saying too much, in only just a few paragraphs and some subsequent developer tweets. First off, it's super important to note that this is not The Witcher 4, so Geralt probably won't be the main protagonist. I'm not saying he won't be featured in the game to some degree, but you never know. The medallion featured in the blog post announcing the game was also confirmed to be a medallion from the School of the Lynx, which is a new school, so to me, this indicates that we will either be a completely new character in a different timeline, or even a custom character creating our own school, which personally I think that would be the coolest option here. But now hopping into what the blog post actually says and not just some developer tweets, the biggest takeaway is actually that CDPR is entering a multi-year strategic partnership with Epic Games to use Unreal Engine 5 for their future games with the exception of the Cyberpunk expansion. Now since this specific announcement, Epic Games has gone on to reveal that there are many partnerships that they're entering into with developers from all over the industry. But let's talk about why this is specifically important to CD Projekt Red. First off, and the biggest in my opinion, is Unreal Engine 5 is not CD Projekt Red's in-house proprietary engine, meaning they won't have to make most of the assets for it. Textures and different development things like that, of course, but what I mean is they don't have to go out of their way to introduce, say, RTX to their Red engine yet again, and make it unstable after every new update, which is something that their engine has slowly becoming less and less stable over the years, which came to complete fruition with Cyberpunk 2077. The engine's at its limits, and it's important that they find something that can be sustainable, and also important in other aspects, such as the fact that with Unreal Engine, that is a universally known development tool, meaning anyone who's developed in Unreal Engine 4, or even already into Unreal Engine 5, when they are hired on at CD Projekt Red, will not need to be onboarded and taught how to use their proprietary Red engine anymore. They can simply get to work in Unreal Engine 5, thus cutting development time and hopefully cost as well with these new hires. Combining the fact that you don't need to train new hires and even the fact that you don't need to overly develop this new engine, it's also important to note that Epic Games has great customer support to where any quirks that they do find in this engine, they don't need to always solve themselves. They can always just go to Epic Games or any number of forums for help with the issue. I know that sounds like a cop-out kind of answer, but it's rather important to know that it's a widespread engine and not something that only CDPR uses. And again, remember, while this partnership is very important for The Witcher and the next game there, it's also going to affect all games moving forward for some number of years. Other than that, we don't really know too much about The Witcher. It is more than likely years and years away, as it's probably only in early concept stages. As a little tack on at the end, one thing that was said, and I promise I'll circle back around to it in just a little bit, is the game director is Jason Slama, who previously directed the mobile Gwent, and also worked on The Witcher 3. In a reply to a tweet mentioning CDPR's past with crunch and poor treatment of their employees, he replied, "Never on my watch." So we'll really have to wait and see on that, but again, I'll circle back to that in just a few moments. But circling back around to that other announcement outside of that earnings call was actually the delay of The Witcher 3's next-gen update. Unless you're living under a rock in Novigrad trying to hide from all those pesky mage hunters, you would know that The Witcher 3 is getting a next-gen upgrade for free for all next-gen console owners as well as PC. Higher resolutions and frame rates will most likely be the focus, but there are kind of little rumors that there will be current-gen features such as ray tracing and other things like that going on. But again, this is the older engine, so it remains to see just how much they can get out of it. Though, let it be known that RTX was implemented for Cyberpunk, which is using the relatively same engine as The Witcher 3, albeit heavily modified. And while this all sounds very good and very promising, the sad news of the delay did come from a tweet from the Witcher account on April 13th stating that it was decided to bring the remaining development of the next-gen update in-house to their own team. It was previously outsourced to Saber Interactive, who had also ported The Witcher 3 to the Nintendo Switch to relative success, I believe. I mean, the game ran on the Switch natively, which is more than I think anyone could have ever asked for. And also, I believe it had cross-progression, which is insanely effective for Switch audiences. Originally set to release in 2021, and then delayed to Q2 of 2022, and then indefinitely delayed with that set of tweets, but now, as I can now tell you, it has now been confirmed for a Q4 release window of 2022. So as I had previously thought and had originally recorded for this video before this information just came out, it would still be arriving this year. And from a tweet from Marcin Mormont, regarding the contents of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Next Gen version, it comes with both expansion packs, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, as well as all previously released DLCs and patches, which were the free content and alterations to the character looks, as well as new DLC inspired by the Witcher Netflix series. You'll probably be able to play as Henry Cavill's Geralt, unfortunately probably not with his voice acting, which is fine, as well as armor packs and probably even changes to Ciri and Yennefer as well. And then of course add on the technical improvements on top of that. So there you go guys, something to look forward to for the Witcher franchise by the end of this year. Now with those two things out of the way, let's get into the kind of more nitty-gritty smaller things that we did get from that earnings call. And first up, as of April 14th of 2022, The Witcher 3 has sold 40 million plus copies, and the series as a whole has sold 65 million plus copies. Where's my Witcher 1 fam at? But really this is an incredible feat, and I'm really curious to see just how big the sales will be for the next game in the franchise, especially considering some of the things that we'll be talking about soon. It's also important to note that CDPR has two other active Witcher titles. First, there's Gwent that's on mobile as well as consoles, but also the mobile-only AR game, very similar to Pokemon Go, called The Witcher Monster Slayer. And in 2022, both of these titles are meant to be supported, but Gwent players should also expect a single-player mode at some point. Okay, now, as we shift over to the Cyberpunk IP, I'd like to kind of make this transition by talking about Red 2.0, which is basically the internal restructuring of the company to better suit the business model. The main points of interest include the creation of 2 agile development teams to allow work on 2 games simultaneously, as well as a bigger emphasis on employee well-being. This could be wishful thinking, but perhaps the director of the new Witcher game is truly the first example of this conversation, and I would love for that to be the case, because I really do want to root for these guys. Restructuring a company is always a really hard and long task to do, but we'll always just have to wait and see what happens. Now, the most important thing to take away is that CDPR has 2 development teams working on multiple games. This isn't a dream, however, this is already happening. The newest game being The Witcher, but also don't forget there's still a team working on the Cyberpunk 2077 expansion. In fact, this chart here breaking down how much manpower across the entire company is going into each of the projects that are being worked on, and as you can see in the most recent bit of information, the largest group of the workforce is still on the Cyberpunk 2077 expansion. With a dwindling amount of manpower going in to further patches and support ever since the next-gen version launched earlier this year, it's clear that most of the effort is going into content finally, as well as the fact that there are really small percentages to other teams, including The Witcher still, really does show that Cyberpunk is still the focus as of right now, which to players that have been holding out for an expansion or any new content at all, this is really exciting. Now, while we're still looking at this graph, there's a couple things I wanted to kind of clear up and get out of the way now. If you see Spoko, that is the team behind The Witcher Monster Slayer, the mobile game that I previously mentioned, and they were brought into CDPR back in 2018 with a buyout of the majority of their shares to work on mobile games with CDPR's IP. And the aforementioned title is the fruit of that labor, first launching in 2021. The other studio that you see on the graph is the Molasses Flood, which, being a Boston-based studio, has a very topical name, where a tank storing molasses did actually burst, killing 21 people and injuring many more. And that's pretty grim, but I really love that, and just a cool little bit of information for you. Anyways, they've made a game that I was at least aware of, and I feel most people might have at least heard the name of, The Flame in the Flood, and they were acquired by CD Projekt in 2021. And while we don't currently know what they're working on, the announcement post does say that the studio will stay independent of the other projects, meaning they won't just get absorbed to work on the new Witcher game or Cyberpunk, but it also says that they'll be building games in worlds that we love, so one would assume that this probably means they're building a survival or perhaps a completely new styled game for them, but that's their track record, in either the worlds of The Witcher or Cyberpunk, and I just personally think this fits better into The Witcher, but maybe that's just me. Now, just because both of these two acquisitions have remained on solo projects doesn't mean that the main teams haven't been bolstered either. Earlier in 2021, CDPR also acquired Digital Scapes, based out of Canada, and renamed the site to CDPR Vancouver. This will allow CDPR to recruit and acquire new talent in the Canadian game atmosphere, and I think this is really good overall because a lot of good games come out of that area, meaning that if anyone leaves one team, they can always just hop right on at CDPR now. But anyways, with the workforce breakdown, as well as the acquisitions bolstering and adding to the CDPR family, let's finally jump into Cyberpunk 2077. And say what you will about the game, but you have to admit it's a very bold decision to go from a third-person fantasy melee RPG to a futuristic first-person shooter with RPG elements. And honestly, it's quite a shakeup that I'm really proud of them for doing, and something that I really enjoyed playing out as a fan of both of the franchises. But let's go ahead and circle back to that investor call for just a minute. And as of April of 2022, Cyberpunk 2077 has sold 18 million copies. A huge number regardless of how you look at it, and supposedly the game was profitable even before it launched with just pre-orders alone. But how many of those were refunded, you have to ask. And that's something that we may never know, but Cyberpunk has had a troubled history to say the very least. Mainly, but not exclusively, the PS4 and Xbox One generation of consoles had extremely poor performance and a myriad of visual and game-breaking bugs that in turn called for a lot of players wanting refunds. This escalated so far that Sony actually removed Cyberpunk from the PlayStation Store only a week after launch to eliminate the headache of actually refunding the game. Eventually, after a few much-needed patches, the game returned to the PlayStation Store in June of 2021. Considering it came off in December, that's an insanely long time. And that came with the promise that the next-gen version of the game would be coming later that year. However, that didn't occur until February 15th of this year, 2022, with patch 1.5. General reception of the update was good, and while the game still has fundamental flaws that I don't believe can just be patched out, it still seems to be in a state that could be deemed worthy as launch ready. If you're interested in seeing how well the game has improved, subscribe. I'll be doing my Cyberpunk review later this year. But now, as a lot of Cyberpunk's issues have been addressed to some degree, there is an increase in focus on the game's presumably only major story expansion, releasing sometime in 2023. Okay, I promise this is the last time I'm going to do this, but after my original recording, there was news, or rather leaks, about the Cyberpunk 2077 expansion, and there have been quite a few updates. According to data miners on Reddit, the game's current version has files which include quest structures and lines of dialogue seemingly from the upcoming expansion. According to the leak, there will be 7 main story missions alongside fixer quests and new world encounters, and while this all does still take place in Night City, we will at least be able to go to the combat zone, a place mentioned in the original game. We also know a little bit more about the story as well. First off, there's a character named Songbird who was originally data mined as a deleted or unfinished character in the original version of the game that now seems to be central to the DLC. The most important thing to take away from all of this is that the expansion does take place during the events of Cyberpunk 2077, so therefore it will not be after, there will not be a canon ending in which V survives or anything like that. But bouncing off of that, one thing that's really cool is whatever happens to the player during this expansion seemingly has a new ending, or at least will alter the endings that are already in the game. So really cool to see that payoff. Now, to avoid spoilers, I didn't look at the full report, but I'm hoping it's more than just slight dialogue changes to the endings that we already get. Potentially a whole new ending would be really cool. One other bit of information that I thought was really interesting was that Johnny Silverhand has very little dialogue throughout the expansion. Now, perhaps this could still yet to be added, seeing as how Keanu Reeves has potentially yet to even return for the role. However, it very well could just be a budgetary reason, and we shouldn't hold our breath that we'll get more Johnny Silverhand. Either way, I think this does mark a big tonal shift for the expansion compared to the main game, in my opinion. Now, expanding on this information even further, we actually do have news from CD Projekt Red. They had yet another little earnings call. They are now all hands on deck on the expansion, and most importantly, the marketing for that will begin in the second half of this year, 2022, which, depending on how hard they go with the marketing, very well suggests to me that we'll be getting the expansion for Cyberpunk 2077 happening sometime in the first half of 2023. Aside from a major story expansion and even the next-gen versions of the game, Cyberpunk has also gotten a few small free pieces of DLC, and will hopefully get more, much in the vein of The Witcher 3's cosmetic changes, and nothing too crazy to write home about. This will probably, hopefully, build some goodwill with CDPR once again, as they'll want to go into the new Witcher saga in stride. And that's the only confirmed content we have for Cyberpunk 2077 at this time. There is one other medium that we do need to talk about. And while this isn't technically a CD Projekt Red project, say that 5 times fast, I dare you, there will be a Cyberpunk anime expanding the world of the universe from Netflix in association with Trigger Animation sometime in the future. Now, we don't know exactly when this will be, more than likely this year to some degree, but what we do know for sure is that it will be getting shown off during Netflix's Geeked Week, which runs from June 6th to the 10th, and maybe then we'll get an idea of when these 10 episodes of Cyberpunk do get released. Anyways, we've covered a lot in this video, from mobile games to anime adaptations, as well as 2 major, really high-grossing IPs with plenty of spin-offs and new studio acquisitions. This has been everything you need to know about the state of CD Projekt Red. Again, if you really like this video, or if there's anything I missed, please let me know down below, as I will be only looking to improve for the next video. Hopefully this will be over Remedy Entertainment, but I'm unconfirmed on this, and if you have a suggestion down below, let me know. Eventually I want to build to the point where I can go through, say, the Xbox Studios, or even PlayStation, and then eventually be able to combine them all into one video for like Sony or Xbox as a whole. That would be really cool and a whole dream to work towards, but for right now we'll stick to some smaller independent things like CD Projekt Red, Remedy Entertainment, who has a lot of deals that we can lay the groundwork for some of those bigger projects down the line. Either way, if this is exciting to you, or say reviews or even gameplay videos that I do from time to time, go ahead and subscribe or check out some other videos on the channel, they're all there. Now enough about talking about me, let me know how you're doing. Anyways, yeah, bye.